It all started, as these things often do, with a whisper. A faint signal detected by the deep space listening arrays orbiting Jupiter. Not a broadcast, not a greeting, but more like the ambient hum of a distant city. For years, humanity had scanned the void, dreaming of alien minds, wondering what wonders or terrors awaited us. When the signal was finally confirmed as artificial, originating from the Cygnus arm, there was a global outpouring of excitement, fear, and cautious hope. We sent probes, of course, a whole fleet of them, racing across light years with messages of peace and curiosity. We thought we were ready, you see. We thought we understood first contact. But as we'd soon learn, the universe had a very different definition. The initial probes returned nothing. Just static, then silence. A lot of people on Earth started to think it was a false alarm, or perhaps a derelict ancient civilization. But the truth, as always, was far more complex and much, much closer. The hum from Cygnus wasn't a city, it was a fleet, a vast armada of vessels unlike anything we could have imagined. They arrived not in a blaze of glory or a broadcast of intent, but with a chilling, silent precision, appearing first at the fringes of our Kuiper belt. Their ships were sleek, obsidian constructs, designed for speed and intimidation, moving with an eerie, almost liquid grace. My friends, the excitement about first contact vanished the moment our deep space telescopes resolved the true nature of their advance. They weren't sending greetings, they were sending a declaration of intent, and that intent was clear. They were here to conquer. Now imagine that moment. Humanity unified for the first time in centuries, not against itself, but against an external, overwhelming threat. The initial reports were horrifying. Our orbital defense platforms, the pride of our interstellar deterrent, were dismantled with effortless ease. Their energy weapons, a shimmering green that burned through durasteel like tissue paper, seemed unstoppable. We had always believed our technology was advanced, our strategies honed, but against the sheer scale and technological superiority of the Kthar, that was the name we eventually learned to whisper with dread, we were children. Our initial defenses crumbled, not because of a lack of courage, but because we simply weren't prepared for a species that treated a full-scale assault as a casual maneuver. This was the moment where our grand theories of cosmic diplomacy evaporated, replaced by the chilling reality of existential war. The Kthar, with their multi-jointed limbs and glowing crimson eyes, broadcasted their demands in a series of guttural clicks and hisses, translated instantly by our captured satellites. Unconditional surrender. Integration into their galactic empire. And a heavy tribute in resources and, chillingly, biological assets. They saw us as primitives, a species ripe for harvesting, our planet a mere stepping stone in their relentless expansion. Their broadcasts were laced with contempt, describing us as fragile, emotional, and utterly incapable of coordinated resistance. This, my friends, was their first fatal mistake. They saw our initial disarray and mistook it for weakness. They saw our fear and assumed it meant submission. They hadn't accounted for one crucial, indefinable element, the sheer, bloody-minded refusal of humanity to lie down and die. As their vanguard ships breached the orbit of Mars, preparing to establish forward operating bases, a desperate planetary defense council convened on Earth. The chatter was frantic. Evacuate? Negotiate? But a grim determination began to harden. We might be outgunned, outmaneuvered, but we weren't outfought. And this is where the story truly begins to twist, where the classic HFY elements start to emerge. Our generals, the ones the Kthar expected to find, well, they weren't exactly generals in the traditional sense anymore. The top brass knew that conventional warfare was a lost cause. So, they made a radical decision. They didn't send politicians to beg. They didn't send diplomats to parley. They sent specialists. They sent the kind of people who solve problems not with grand strategies, but with surgical, often brutal, efficiency. We're talking about the operatives of the Global Security Directorate, or GSD. These weren't your parade ground soldiers. These were individuals forged in the fires of black ops, deep cover, and impossible missions. They were the ones who vanished into the shadows and emerged with the impossible done. Their training wasn't about holding a line, it was about breaking one. Their specialty wasn't defense, it was disruption. And when the call came down, they didn't hesitate. Colonel Eva Rostova, a woman whose eyes held the cold wisdom of 1,000 forgotten battlefields, was given command of Project Chimera. Her mission: not to defeat the Kthar fleet, but to make them bleed, to make them question, to make them fear. This was our first real act of defiance, not with a roar but with a whisper and a sharpened blade. The initial Kthar landing on Phobos, Mars's moon, was a meticulously planned affair. They established a command center, a formidable fortress of interlocking energy shields and automated turrets. They were confident, almost arrogant in their security protocols. They knew we knew they were there. They simply didn't believe we could do anything about it. This arrogance, my friends, was a blind spot the size of a planet. While their legions prepared to descend on the Martian surface, Rostova's teams were already in motion. We didn't have starships to match theirs, but we had ingenuity and we had the ability to go unnoticed. Small, heavily modified insertion craft, barely larger than atmospheric shuttles, slipped through the orbital debris, masked by electronic countermeasures refined over decades of human-on-human subterfuge. It's a testament to human cunning, isn't it? When you can't go over, you go under. When you can't go through, you go around. The Cthar, you see, operated on a strict hierarchy, a rigid chain of command. Their tactics were predictable, their formations precise. They valued order above all else. And that, dear listeners, is precisely what humanity thrives on disrupting. Rostova's plan wasn't to destroy Phobos. It was to decapitate the enemy's early command structure, to sow chaos and doubt. Her teams, a mere few dozen elite operatives, were armed not with heavy ordnance, but with specialized tools. EMP grenades that fried alien electronics, sonic disruptors designed to interfere with Cthar bioscanners, and, most importantly, a profound understanding of psychological warfare. They were ghosts in the machine, exploiting every blind spot, every overconfidence. One of the key operatives was a young man named Jax, an expert in infiltration and electronic warfare. He wasn't physically imposing, but his mind was a weapon. His team's objective, to breach the Cthar data core on Phobos. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple. They were expected to fail, but to cause enough trouble that the Cthar would reconsider their easy conquest. What happened next, however, was something truly remarkable. Using salvaged Cthar comms equipment, disguised as a chunk of space rock, Jax and his team managed to spoof the alien security network. They created ghost signals, making it appear as though an internal power conduit was failing, diverting patrol routes, and opening a brief, almost imperceptible window in the Cthar defenses. It wasn't about brute force, it was about outsmarting the unoutsmartable. It was human cunning versus alien might. Inside the Phobos command center, the Cthar commander, a multi-eyed creature named Xylos, was overseeing the final preparations for the Martian invasion. He was arrogant, dismissive of human capabilities, focused only on the schedule. He saw a flicker on his console, a minor anomaly, and dismissed it as a calibration error. That small human-induced error was all Jax needed. While the Cthar were busy chasing phantom breakdowns, Jax's team slipped into a ventilation shaft, a tiny, almost impossible opening they'd exploited with a thermal lance. This is where the human ability to adapt, to push physical limits, truly shines. They were deep inside the enemy's fortress, an almost impossible feat that would have been laughed at by Cthar tacticians. The next few hours were a blur of silent movement, close-quarters combat, and nerve-wracking evasion. The Cthar were formidable warriors, strong and fast, but they were not accustomed to fighting an enemy that moved like a shadow, an enemy that used its surroundings and its cunning as weapons. Jax's team used their knowledge of Cthar physiology, striking at vulnerable joint connections, disabling their vision sensors with targeted bursts of light, and always keeping moving. It was a dance of death, a desperate ballet against overwhelming odds. Each human casualty was felt deeply, a heavy blow, but they pressed on. They remembered why they were there, not just for Earth but for everyone who believed humanity was more than just a resource to be harvested. Then came the moment of the twist. Jax reached the Cthar data core, a massive crystal structure pulsating with alien energy. He wasn't there to destroy it. Rostova's true objective was far more audacious. While Jax worked, his team members in a daring diversion created localized EMP blasts, not to destroy Cthar systems, but to flood their networks with seemingly random, chaotic data. It was a smokescreen for Jax's true intent, to inject a sophisticated, self-replicating virus into the Cthar's primary command network. This wasn't about stealing data, it was about corrupting it. The virus was codenamed Pandora. Its purpose wasn't to crash systems, but to subtly alter tactical data, to misdirect supply convoys, to create phantom enemy formations on Cthar sensors, to introduce infinitesimal delays in command decisions. Imagine trying to fight a war when your maps are slightly off, your orders are delayed by milliseconds, and your enemy suddenly appears in 3 places at once on your radar. It was psychological warfare on a grand scale, designed to chip away at Cthar confidence, to make them question their own infallible technology. It was, in essence, a digital poison, slowly corroding their perfect war machine from the inside. As Jax initiated the upload, alarms blared through the Phobos base. The Kthar finally realized they had been infiltrated, and they responded with overwhelming force. Jax and his team, having completed their mission, fought their way out, a desperate rearguard action. Many were lost in the furious retreat, but the mission was accomplished. They left behind a trail of disruption and doubt. And for the first time, the Kthar commander, Xylos, felt a tremor of something unfamiliar. Not just anger but genuine confusion. Who were these creatures? They fought not like an organized army, but like a swarm of angry, intelligent wasps, striking precisely where it hurt most. The aftermath on Phobos was immediate. Kthar fleet movements became erratic. Supply lines faltered, ships arrived at incorrect coordinates, and minor skirmishes broke out between Kthar vessels responding to ghost threats. On Earth, our deep space monitors, while still outmatched, began to notice the subtle disarray. This, my friends, was the moment we understood the true power of human ingenuity. We couldn't fight them ship for ship, but we could fight them mind for mind. We could fight them with a weapon they didn't understand: chaos. The Kthar, operating on a galaxy-spanning scale, had conquered countless worlds. Their strategy was always the same: overwhelm, subjugate, integrate. They expected a unified, linear resistance. They expected clear lines of engagement. What they got from humanity was a decentralized, unpredictable hydra. Rostova's teams, emboldened by the Phobos mission, began to execute similar, audacious strikes across the solar system. They targeted Kthar communication relays, not to destroy them, but to subtly alter enemy intel reports. They deployed automated mining drones to plant miniature, self-activating EMP devices in asteroid fields, creating sudden, localized energy surges that knocked Kthar patrol vessels offline. Every action was a pinprick, a diversion, a psychological barb designed to wear down an enemy that relied on absolute control. One particularly ingenious tactic involved planting a sophisticated acoustic emitter on a Kthar supply vessel. This device, disguised as a loose panel, broadcasted Kthar command frequencies, but slightly out of sync, creating a subtle, almost subliminal dissonance for any Kthar within range. It didn't physically harm them, but it created an insidious sense of unease, a feeling that something was wrong with their own communications. Imagine trying to coordinate a massive invasion when every order feels subtly off, every report sounds slightly distorted. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a weapon that targeted not the enemy's ships, but their minds. The Kthar, in their rigid adherence to protocol, couldn't comprehend this kind of warfare. They searched for conventional threats, for enemy fleets, for sabotage they could understand. They saw no organized resistance, yet their operations grew increasingly muddled. Their high command, far away in Cygnus, began to receive conflicting reports. Humanity, a primitive species, was causing disproportionate levels of disruption. It didn't fit their tactical models. It violated their understanding of how conquest should proceed. This, my friends, is a powerful lesson. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in matching an enemy's power, but in rendering that power irrelevant. As the weeks turned into months, the Kthar invasion force, once a paragon of efficiency, began to fray at the edges. Morale plummeted among their lower ranks, who couldn't understand why they were constantly chasing ghosts and dealing with equipment malfunctions that seemed to defy explanation. Their superior officers grew increasingly frustrated, unable to pinpoint the source of the subtle sabotage. They started blaming each other, internal conflicts arising from the very chaos humanity had deliberately sown. It was a slow, agonizing process, but it was working. Humanity wasn't winning battles in space. It was winning the war of attrition, not of lives but of sanity. On Earth, while the orbital defenses were still being rebuilt and our remaining ships were being modified for guerrilla tactics, a new kind of confidence began to emerge. We were still the underdog, massively outmatched, but we were fighting. And we were hurting them in ways they hadn't anticipated. The news reports, once grim and despairing, now spoke of unexplained Kthar anomalies and tactical setbacks. It was a subtle shift, but it was enough to rekindle hope. This is a profound human trait, isn't it? Our ability to find a glimmer of hope, to persevere, even when all the odds are stacked against us. The real turning point came with Operation Starlight. Rostova, seeing the Kthar fleet's growing internal discord, devised a plan to exploit it directly. Her teams identified the flagship of the Kthar commander, Xylos, a massive vessel bristling with weaponry. But they weren't going to attack it directly. Instead, they focused on its primary communications array. Using a captured Kthar shuttle, a daring raid in itself, a small team led by a former deep space engineer named Dr. Eris Thorne managed to attach a high-powered, directional energy pulse emitter to the flagship's sensor spine. Their objective, not destruction but disinformation. Dr. Thorne, a man who once spent his days calibrating telescopes, now found himself an integral part of a desperate war effort. His team, with meticulous precision, timed the activation of the emitter. The pulse, when it fired, was designed to mimic a distress signal from a specific Kthar patrol cruiser known to be operating in a distant sector, but with a critical difference. The distress code was one reserved only for internal Kthar fleet emergencies, indicating a catastrophic system failure and an immediate need for assistance. This wasn't just a false alarm, it was a deeply embarrassing, protocol-breaking cry for help. Xylos, the Kthar commander, received the distress signal during a critical phase of his invasion planning. His response was immediate and furious. How could a vessel under his command suffer such a failure? More importantly, why was it broadcasting such a humiliating signal to the entire fleet? He ordered a significant portion of his escort vessels, including his personal guard, to divert and investigate. This was the trap. This was humanity's genius at work, not outfighting them but outthinking them. With Xylos's flagship temporarily vulnerable and a large portion of his fleet diverted, humanity launched its counterstrike. Not with a massive fleet because we didn't have one, but with every modified scout ship, every armed freighter, every relic from our space program that could be outfitted with a railgun or a missile launcher. It was a desperate, chaotic charge targeting the weakened flagship directly. It wasn't about destroying it, it was about capturing Xylos, about capturing the head of the snake. This was the moment where courage met opportunity, and humanity truly shone. The battle that ensued was brutal. Our ships, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a ferocity that stunned the Kthar. They had never encountered such reckless abandon, such a complete disregard for their own survival in pursuit of an objective. Human pilots, using daring, suicidal maneuvers, disabled Kthar engines, sacrificed their vessels to create openings, and pushed through the withering fire. It was a testament to the human spirit, that willingness to sacrifice for something greater than oneself, that refusal to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds. The Kthar had superior firepower, but we had something they couldn't quantify: sheer, unadulterated grit. And then, the twist within the twist. As our most advanced boarding craft, piloted by Rostova herself, breached the flagship's hull, a hidden defense was revealed. An internal Kthar security force, unlike anything we had encountered. These were not the rigid, predictable soldiers of the invasion force, but agile, deadly close-quarters specialists, clearly designed to repel. Boarders. The fighting inside the flagship was savage, a desperate knife fight in the dark corridors of an alien vessel. Rostova's team, armed with prototype energy blasters and combat knives, fought tooth and nail, pushing deeper into the ship. But the true ingenuity came from an unexpected source. During their infiltration of Phobos, Jax's team had managed to download schematics of the Kthar flagship's environmental controls. They discovered that Kthar, while resilient, were highly sensitive to specific atmospheric frequencies and temperature fluctuations. While Rostova's team drew the attention of the internal security, a small, secondary team, commanded by Jax, remotely manipulated the flagship's life support systems. They didn't depressurize the ship or poison the air. They simply introduced a subtle, oscillating atmospheric resonance that, for Kthar, caused extreme nausea and disorientation. It was a weapon they couldn't see, couldn't fight, and couldn't comprehend. The Kthar internal security force, suddenly gripped by debilitating motion sickness and sensory overload, became less effective. Their movements became sluggish, their aim faltered. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was enough. Rostova's team, still fighting against a weakened but formidable enemy, pushed through the compromised defenses, reaching Xylos's command bridge. The Kthar commander, witnessing the collapse of his elite guards, surrounded by a species he had dismissed as primitive, finally understood. These humans weren't just fighting, they were adapting, innovating, and using his own technology against him in ways he couldn't have imagined. The capture of Xylos was a seismic event. Not only did it sever the head of the Kthar invasion force in our system, but it also sent a shockwave through their entire galactic empire. Here was a species they had written off, a mere resource, who had captured one of their most celebrated commanders. It defied all their tactical manuals, all their experience. It proved that a species' technological advancement isn't the only measure of its worth, or its danger. It proved that sometimes the greatest weapon is the mind, coupled with an unwavering spirit. In the ensuing months, with Xylos as a captive and a source of vital intelligence, humanity began to turn the tide. We used the Kthar's own communication protocols to sow further discord within their ranks, broadcasting false orders and fabricating reports of internal rebellions in other sectors. We reverse-engineered their technology, adapting their energy weapons and shield generators for our own defense. We learned from them, but we didn't become them. We maintained our unique human approach, flexible, adaptable, and always seeking the unexpected solution. The Kthar, frustrated and bleeding resources, eventually pulled back their main invasion fleet from our solar system. They didn't retreat in total defeat, but they retreated in confusion, their grand conquest stalled, their confidence shattered. They had encountered countless species across the galaxy, but none had fought with such unconventional tenacity, such baffling ingenuity. They had expected to add another star system to their empire. Instead, they encountered a crucible that forged humanity into something sharper, more resilient, and far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The war wasn't over, of course. True peace with an empire like the Kthar would take generations. But humanity had bought itself time. It had proven its worth. It had shown the galaxy that while we might be young, while we might seem fragile, we possessed an inner strength, a creative fire, and a collective courage that could not be easily extinguished. We had stared into the abyss, and we had not only refused to flinch, but we had found a way to push back. This story, my friends, is a powerful reminder. It's a lesson that true strength isn't just about firepower or advanced technology. It's about resilience, about ingenuity, about the willingness to adapt, to learn, and to fight for what you believe in, no matter how overwhelming the odds. It's about teamwork, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. Humanity, in its chaotic, emotional, and utterly unpredictable way, proved that day that we are not just survivors, we are innovators. We are creators. And when the chips are down, we are incredibly, powerfully, and undeniably human. And that, in itself, is the greatest weapon of all. The consolidation of chaos and the Kthar reckoning. The retreat of the main Kthar invasion fleet wasn't a sign of surrender, but a regrouping, a terrifying moment of reflection for an empire unused to tactical setbacks. Xylos's capture was an embarrassment, a systemic failure that the Kthar High Command, known as the Triumvirate, could not tolerate. Their response was predictable in its ferocity, but strategically modified by the very chaos we had injected. They knew conventional assault was failing, so they shifted their focus, not on overwhelming force, but on containment and psychological warfare, the very tactics humanity had perfected. They intended to quarantine the solar system, starve us of resources, and watch us turn on ourselves. This next phase was a brutal test of human unity, a trial by fire far more subtle than the initial battles. This shift in Kthar strategy demanded a radical change in human defense philosophy. Colonel Rostova, now promoted to general, didn't rest on the laurels of the Phobos' success. She knew the Triumvirate would hit back with calculated malice. Our Defense Council, now officially renamed the Interstellar Defense and Innovation Command (IDIC), recognized that containment was a slow-motion siege. Their plan wasn't just defense, it was the weaponization of our own territory. We couldn't fight the siege ships outside the solar system, but we could make the space within it a death trap. Thousands of decommissioned satellites, orbital junk, and asteroid fragments were retrofitted with stealth drives and rudimentary sensors, transforming them into a vast, silent minefield that enveloped the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. This was a massive undertaking requiring global cooperation and an almost frantic use of automated manufacturing, a true testament to human industry under pressure. Our captive, Xylos, provided a steady, albeit begrudging, stream of intelligence, or rather negative intelligence. He never willingly gave up secrets, but his reactions, his denials, and his specific contempt for certain concepts provided IDIC's analysts with crucial keys. They learned, for instance, that the Kthar were heavily reliant on automated logistics protocols and that any unscheduled deviation caused systemic instability. Furthermore, Xylos's visible distress over the loss of a specific Kthar religious artifact, known as the Shard of Unity, revealed a hidden cultural vulnerability we never expected in such a cold, efficient empire. This was the moment we realized the enemy was not a monolithic machine. It was an empire, rife with internal politics and unexpected weaknesses. The Kthar responded to the minefield with their advanced void sifters, massive, slow-moving vessels designed to methodically clear space debris using powerful tractor beams and focused plasma charges. These ships were seemingly immune to our minor retrofitted mines. However, General Rostova's team, led by Dr. Eris Thorne, now Chief of Applied Countertactics, had anticipated this. Thorn wasn't trying to destroy the sifters. He was trying to reprogram the junk they collected. His teams used specialized seed drones, micromachines disguised as common space dust, that latched onto the captured debris. When the debris was pulled aboard the sifters, the drones activated, subtly overriding the ship's navigation and sensor data. The result was an unfolding disaster for the Cthar that looked like a bizarre accident. Two void sifters, completely intact, suddenly veered off course near the Saturnian rings and, guided by their corrupt navigation, locked onto each other for a rescue docking maneuver. They collided at moderate velocity, not destroying each other, but rendering both vessels hopelessly disabled and drifting. A third sifter, believing it was receiving a distress signal from a friendly patrol, dropped its shields and opened its docking bay, only to be met by a heavily armed, human-piloted salvage vessel that had been patiently hiding among the gas giant's moons. This wasn't an explosive victory, it was an almost comedic tactical embarrassment, proving once again that human mischief and cleverness trumped alien technological brute force. We didn't fight their ships, we made their ships fight themselves. This period of quiet, insidious warfare led to our next great innovation, Project Echo Chamber. We knew the Cthar Triumvirate was watching, desperate to understand the primitive species causing them so much trouble. Jax, the young infiltration genius, proposed an audacious plan. Since they think we are savages, let's show them what true unified savagery looks like. Using captured Cthar broadcasting relays, IDIC began transmitting carefully crafted, highly stylized messages designed purely for Cthar consumption. These weren't surrender demands or peace treaties. They were boasts, taunts, and chilling declarations of human intent, all subtly referencing their known vulnerabilities, including the mythical Shard of Unity. The broadcasts, often featuring deep-faked images of human soldiers interacting casually with their former commander Xylos, images designed to suggest his cooperation, even though he remained defiant, served two purposes. First, they were meant to damage Xylos's reputation among his peers, suggesting treachery and further eroding Cthar unity. Second, they played directly into the Cthar fear of the unpredictable. We created narratives of genetically engineered human superkillers and planet-killing weapons we didn't possess. We used lies as shields and threats as missiles. We leveraged our own dramatic, storytelling nature as a weapon. And the response from the Cthar side of the containment line showed it was working. Patrols became more aggressive, but also more paranoid, often firing on friendly vessels they mistook for human decoys. The major twist came when the Triumvirate, convinced that the humans were indeed plotting to steal the Shard of Unity from its hidden temple on their home world, dispatched a small, highly specialized, and deeply paranoid security detachment towards the solar system. This detachment was not part of the main invasion force. They were the Triumvirate's personal enforcers, sent to retrieve Xylos and verify the status of the Shard threat. This was a perfect opportunity, a narrow aperture in the Cthar defenses. It proved that sometimes the most effective human weapon is understanding the enemy's deepest held beliefs and using them as bait. General Rostova immediately recognized the risk and the reward. The approaching enforcers were small, fast, and dangerous, but they represented a tactical anomaly. They were outside the expected invasion protocol. She committed nearly all of IDIC's remaining dedicated warships to intercept this detachment near the orbit of Uranus. It was a terrifying gamble. If they failed, Earth would be defenseless. The resulting battle, known as the Battle of the Azure Fringe, was not a slugfest of beams and missiles, but a complex, three-dimensional chess match. The humans, still outgunned, used the gas giant's gravitational anomalies to slingshot their vessels, performing dizzying, energy-saving maneuvers the Cthar simply didn't account for in their straight-line, efficient combat doctrine. During the battle, Dr. Thorne's team deployed their ultimate low-tech solution, chaff clouds. They launched millions of tiny reflective microdrones, which formed massive, rapidly expanding. The Forge of Soul, from defense to deterrence. The strategic pause enforced by the Cthar was not a break, it was the deepest breath before the final plunge. For 2 Earth cycles, the Sentinel drones maintained a cold, silent watch over the solar system, making any outward expansion a deadly risk. But General Rostova and IDIC saw this period of containment not as an imprisonment, but as a crucible. If the Cthar were gathering strength, humanity would become unrecognizable in its dedication to rapid, radical self-improvement. We had proven our cunning. Now we had to prove our ability to rapidly master and surpass alien technology. This was the era of the Forge of Soul. The work was relentless. Dr. Eris Thorne and his expanded team of engineers, linguists, and material scientists were locked away in deep Martian bunkers, dissecting every shred of captured Cthar technology. They didn't just reverse engineer the alien shields and energy conduits. They applied a unique human principle, brute force optimization. Where the Cthar relied on elegant hyper-specialized components, Thorn's teams blended alien tech with rugged, mass-produced human systems. They created hybrid plasma cannons that were less efficient than the originals, yes, but could be built 10 times faster using terrestrial minerals. This wasn't beautiful engineering, it was wartime expediency, a perfect reflection of human pragmatism. The greatest challenge lay in the Cthar FTL drive. Their vessels used complex, quantum-entangled spatial manipulation to jump vast distances, a science far beyond our current understanding. For weeks, Thorn's team was stymied. But Jax, the young operative, offered a lateral solution. He argued, "We can't replicate their engine, but we know how their navigation thinks." Using the corrupt data from the Phobos incident and the sensor readings from the Battle of the Azure Fringe, Jax developed a system designed not to jump through space, but to momentarily blind the Cthar FTL lock-on system. It was a purely defensive, highly localized device, codenamed Mirage Field, designed to make our solar system look like a chaotic, unusable jump point to incoming hostile fleets. If they couldn't jump in cleanly, they couldn't invade efficiently. Meanwhile, the human forces were changing. Rostova introduced the Chimera Doctrine, formalizing the successful guerrilla tactics. Instead of large, vulnerable capital ships, we focused on producing thousands of small, fast, heavily armored Viper frigates. These ships were designed to fight in wolf packs, relying on integrated Mirage Field technology, extreme maneuverability, and the pilot's willingness to execute tight, risky orbital maneuvers, the very thing the rigid Cthar doctrine discouraged. The pilots trained using high-G near-suicidal simulations, pushing the limits of human endurance. It was a recognition that our physical weakness was also our psychological strength. We could endure more pain and uncertainty than our enemies. The Cthar were not idle, however. Their return 2 cycles later was terrifyingly organized. The Second Fleet, commanded by the merciless Admiral Zath, appeared not with the arrogance of the first, but with cold, surgical precision. They arrived at the solar system's perimeter, far outside the range of our internal defenses. But Zath had learned from Xylos's failure. He did not engage directly, instead he initiated the grid lockdown. The Cthar fleet began deploying thousands of sophisticated, energy-dampening buoys, creating a silent, expanding cage around our system, designed to disrupt our communications, drain our ship power, and slowly choke us. This was the ultimate test of human foresight. Idik knew a direct confrontation was still impossible. General Rostova's counterplan, Operation Suntapper, was audacious and completely dependent on human courage. She ordered 3 small teams, one led by Jax, one by a Viper squadron commander named Major Lena Volkov, and a third by Dr. Thorn, to penetrate the grid lockdown and hit the most heavily fortified target, the flagship of Admiral Zath, the Indomitable. Their goal was not to destroy the flagship, but to breach it and deploy the newly developed Chaos Trigger. Jax's team, utilizing the Mirage Field on their small insertion craft, managed to slip through the grid lockdown by posing as a cluster of particularly dense stellar radiation. They succeeded because they relied on a human trait the Cthar had yet to grasp: deception through elegant simplicity. The Cthar were looking for complex signals. Jax gave them nothing but ambient noise. Once inside the lockdown, the 3 teams separated, each with a different critical task that depended on the others. The final act of Operation Suntapper depended on Major Volkov and her Viper squadron. Her task was the most perilous: a diversionary high-speed assault directly on the Indomitable's main shield generators. She and her pilots, knowing their mission was likely a one-way trip, executed a flawless gravity assist maneuver off Jupiter, hitting Zatha's fleet at nearly 40 kilometers per second. Volkov's squadron fought with reckless, brilliant unity, drawing the overwhelming majority of the flagship's defense fire, allowing Jax and Thorn their crucial window. It was a horrifying, heroic sacrifice that demonstrated the ultimate human capacity for commitment. While Volkov's Vipers were being shredded by Cthar defenses, Jax and Thorn, the quiet genius and the relentless engineer, breached the Indomitable. Jax targeted the communications core not for sabotage, but to precisely override it for 15 seconds. Thorn, meanwhile, raced to the engine core carrying the Chaos Trigger. This device was not a bomb. It was a captured Cthar FTL component, modified by Thorn to emit a massive, localized surge of unstable quantum entanglement. The twist comes here: Thorn didn't detonate the component. As Jax opened the 15-second window, Thorn activated the Chaos Trigger. It caused a non-destructive but massive feedback spike in Zatha's FTL systems. The result? A silent message was instantly broadcast to the entire Cthar network. The Indomitable has just initiated a full, unscheduled emergency jump to the coordinates of the Shard of Unity's hidden temple. Admiral Zath, suddenly realizing his flagship was compromised and broadcasting a deeply sacrilegious signal, was thrown into a panic. The Cthar hierarchy, deeply rooted in their cultural reverence for the Shard, instantly read the FTL spike as a human attempt to hijack Zath's ship and desecrate their holy site. Zath was now branded a potential traitor by his own forces. The cohesion of the Second Fleet immediately dissolved as rival commanders began to question Zath's loyalty and position their own ships to intercept the traitorous Indomitable. This was the absolute peak of human ingenuity, not destroying the enemy but weaponizing their faith, culture, and hierarchy. Humanity had turned the Cthar's rigid control and protocol into their greatest weakness. Zath's invasion was instantly crippled by internal conflict and suspicion, allowing the surviving Viper frigates to disengage and retreat back into the Mirage Field's protection. The grid lockdown shattered not by force but by a crisis of faith. The Cthar triumvirate, receiving the frantic, conflicting reports, was once again forced to pull back the remnants of the Second Fleet, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they were defeated by a lie, a deception so intricate and devastating that it made them question the loyalty of their own commanders. The final, grand lesson of this conflict is profound. The Cthar came to our system expecting to harvest resources and subdue primitives. They encountered a species that fights with every tool at its disposal, with physics, psychology, mythology, and the willingness of individuals like Major Volkov to make the ultimate sacrifice for the survival of the collective. We proved that unity and ingenuity are the ultimate deterrent. We never won a fair fight because we refused to fight fairly. We fought human. And that, in the face of impossible odds, is our enduring, terrifying strength. The apex of adaptability, the solar system becomes the weapon. The withdrawal of Admiral Zath's fractured Second Fleet confirmed two chilling truths for IDIC. First, the Cthar Empire was vulnerable to internal mistrust, and second, they would never allow themselves to be defeated by subterfuge again. The next attack would be overwhelming, designed to strip away all possibilities for cleverness and force a direct, conventional confrontation. The triumvirate, wounded and enraged, was mobilizing what intelligence dubbed the Vengeance Fleet, a coalition force of unprecedented size and destructive capability. General Rostova knew Earth had perhaps 1 year to prepare for a fight where no trick, no psychological ploy would be enough. This required the largest, most ambitious project in human history, making the entire solar system actively hostile. The focus shifted from disruption to destruction. Dr. Eris Thorne, who had proven his mastery of blending human and alien tech, was given unlimited resources to implement the Asteroid Armament Initiative, AAI. If humanity couldn't build enough battleships, they would turn the millions of rocks in the asteroid belt into self-guided missiles. Thousands of automated factories deployed across Mars and the Moon began fabricating specialized fusion-powered drive units and targeting systems. These units were attached to the largest, most strategically positioned asteroids, transforming kilometer-wide chunks of rock and metal into kinetic impactors. The goal was simple. When the Cthar arrived, they wouldn't just face a human fleet, they would face a solar system that was actively trying to crush them. Meanwhile, Jax and his network of engineers focused on leveraging the ultimate energy source, the Sun. Their project, the Helios Array, involved positioning thousands of specialized mirrors and lenses into a massive orbital reflector network near Mercury. This wasn't a weapon meant to burn ships. It was designed to create a massive, controlled solar flare anomaly. The Cthar had highly efficient energy shields, but those shields drew staggering power from ambient stellar energy. Jax's plan was to artificially amplify and then suddenly disrupt the local energy field, overloading the Cthar shield generators in a precise moment of vulnerability. It was the ultimate large-scale application of the human principle. Find the flaw, then exploit it with maximum prejudice. The psychological toll on humanity during this year of frantic preparation was immense. Every human knew they were building their own tomb or their ultimate sanctuary. Yet, this shared, terrifying purpose forged an unparalleled unity. The phrase often heard in the Martian factories was, "They thought they could take our resources, we're giving them nothing but the bill." This era of global focus and sheer industrial willpower was perhaps the greatest HFY moment yet, the capacity for sustained, focused effort when facing annihilation. We weren't just brave, we were determined, stubborn, and tirelessly productive. As the deadline approached, IDIC made a calculated, agonizing decision: Project Exodus. Knowing that even their best efforts might fail, They retrofitted a small fleet of deep space research vessels with long-term cryosleep technology and stocked them with comprehensive libraries of human knowledge, art, and science. The mission: to launch these ARC ships silently and secretly toward the nearest viable habitable system. General Rostova authorized the departure of a carefully selected few, scientists, artists, and engineers, not as an escape but as the ultimate insurance policy. It was a tragic, profound act of responsibility, ensuring that even if the Cathar succeeded in destroying the human race, they would fail in extinguishing humanity itself. Then the Sentinels began reporting. The Vengeance fleet was coming. It was immense, 3 times the size of the initial 2 fleets combined, led by the Supreme Cathar Commander, Archon Var, a figure of legendary cruelty and tactical brilliance. Var's strategy was chillingly effective. He did not try to jump close or slip through. He stopped his fleet far outside the Kuiper Belt and began a slow, methodical, total system cleansing. His vanguard ships launched swarms of automated long-range heavy bombardment drones, saturating the outer system with fire, daring the humans to come out and fight conventionally. Rostova's final gambit was now in play, the solar system trap. She ordered the entire built-up human Viper fleet, every single ship, to hold formation and do nothing while the Cathar drones destroyed vast swathes of empty space. This was agonizing. Human ships were being destroyed by Var's methodical long-range bombardment, but Rostova held the line, refusing to give Var the conventional engagement he craved. She was fighting Var's patience, his predictable reliance on overwhelming force. The breaking point came when Var, frustrated by the lack of human reaction, ordered his entire main fleet to advance into the deep void between Jupiter and the asteroid belt, where he believed he could finally corner the defenders. This was the moment General Rostova had waited for. She gave the order to the AI command center on Mars: release the Kraken. The kinetic impactors, hundreds of massive stealth-driven asteroids, were accelerated simultaneously. They weren't aimed at individual ships, but at key sectors of the Cathar formation, using the gravitational pull of Jupiter to multiply their velocity to relativistic speeds. This was the ultimate anti-fleet weapon, silent, unavoidable, and purely kinetic. The Cathar, whose shields were designed to deflect focused energy and plasma, were helpless against multi-ton objects traveling near the speed of light. Entire segments of the Vengeance fleet were vaporized or disabled in spectacular, horrifying collisions. Archon Var, reeling from the catastrophic losses, was forced to break formation, ordering his ships to scatter and evade the sudden onslaught of celestial missiles. This was the critical flaw Rostova needed. Breaking the formation meant breaking the Vengeance fleet's centralized shield network. Var's arrogance in advancing into the belt before engaging the human fleet had cost him dearly. As the Cathar scattered, Rostova gave the second, final order: unleash Helios. Jax and his team, positioned near Mercury, activated the Helios array. The network focused and then violently reversed the ambient solar energy, creating a shockwave of disruptive, negative quantum energy that washed over the fragmented Cathar fleet. The effect was immediate and devastating. Thousands of Cathar shields flickered, overloaded, and failed entirely. The energy grid across the entire fleet crashed. The now vulnerable human Viper fleet, waiting patiently in the shadows of the gas giants, struck with their mass-produced hybrid plasma cannons. They poured devastating fire into the unshielded, disoriented Cathar ships. It wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. Var, witnessing the total collapse of his superior forces, destroyed by rocks, sunlight, and a small fleet of human hot rods, finally understood the terror of facing human adaptability. In the final, desperate moments, Archon Var ordered a full retreat. But Rostova was ready for this too. She had anticipated that fear and ordered the last of the kinetic impactors to create a temporary, inescapable wall in the direction of their retreat. The Cathar were trapped between the asteroid belt, the Helios field, and the tenacious human Vipers. Var's flagship, the Invictus, was disabled and eventually surrounded. General Rostova, in a small command vessel, approached the disabled Invictus. She didn't board the ship. Instead, she broadcast a single translated message across the Cathar command frequencies, meant for Archon Var and the watching triumvirate. This is General Rostova of humanity. We do not surrender. We do not conquer. We demand only one thing: mutual respect. Leave our star system and never return. This solar system is protected. We have nothing more to say. The Cathar, defeated not by superior numbers or technology, but by their own rigidity and the boundless, terrifying ingenuity of a species they deemed primitive, withdrew. The Vengeance fleet was shattered. The Archon was captured. The threat was neutralized. The war for the solar system was over. The ultimate lesson humanity imparted that day was simple yet profound. We are not creatures of stability or predictable patterns. We thrive in chaos, we create solutions where none should exist, and we will turn every weakness, every natural element, and every stolen secret into a weapon for our collective survival. The Cthar sought to subjugate a predictable civilization, but they encountered an unstoppable, rapidly evolving force that had no rules. Humanity had not just survived, it had grown into a power defined by its refusal to be defined. The stars were safe and the universe finally understood. You do not trifle with the creatures of Earth. The dawn of the Terran Mandate, forging peace in the furnace of war. The destruction of the Vengeance fleet and the capture of Archon Var was not just a military victory, it was a political earthquake that echoed across the entire Cthar Empire, and indeed through the entire Orion Arm. For the first time in millennia, the Triumvirate had been decisively, embarrassingly defeated by a newly emergent species. The silence that followed Var's capture was deafening. The galaxy waited, breath held, to see what the victorious humans would do. Would they seek vengeance? Would they launch their own crude conquest? The Cthar expected barbarism. Humanity, instead, delivered a calculated, stabilizing peace. General Rostova, having demonstrated ruthless tactical brilliance, now stepped into the role of Earth's primary interstellar negotiator. Her first act was not to execute Archon Var, but to grant him meticulously documented, highly publicized humanitarian custody. Var was treated with dignity, given access to his rituals, and provided medical care. This was a deliberate, powerful statement to the galaxy. Humanity fought to survive, not to subjugate. We respected our enemies, a concept largely alien to the Cthar's strict hierarchy. This subtle act of respect did more to sow doubt among the Cthar middle ranks than any military defeat. It showed that humans possessed a moral high ground the Triumvirate had long since abandoned. Dr. Eris Thorn and Jax, now celebrated as the architects of the solar system trap, were immediately tasked with the monumental project of converting their defensive weaponry into a perpetual deterrent, the Soul Barrier. The Asteroid Armament Initiative was scaled down but permanently maintained, ensuring the ability to rapidly weaponize the belt again. More importantly, the Helios Array near Mercury was converted into a superpulse communications emitter. This massive network wasn't just for defense, it was for broadcasting. Humanity began sending out meticulously curated, complex transmissions across vast interstellar distances, messages detailing the failure of the Cthar invasion and the terms of Var's custody. These broadcasts were the ultimate demonstration of human creativity. They were not crude propaganda, they were highly structured, multi-layered transmissions incorporating mathematical proofs, cultural histories, and, crucially, a complete, detailed analysis of the Cthar's own tactical vulnerabilities. Humanity essentially sent a user manual for how to defeat the Cthar Empire, proving that they now knew the enemy better than the enemy knew itself. This move terrified the Triumvirate, who relied on their reputation for infallibility and technological superiority. The inevitable peace talks began on neutral ground, facilitated by a nervous, minor galactic civilization known as the Sirin, who desperately wanted the conflict resolved before the Cthar's weakness drew attention from larger predators. Rostova didn't demand planets or vast resources. Her primary non-negotiable demand was simple: recognition of the Terran sphere of influence, a protected, demilitarized zone extending 50 light-years around Sol, and a massive, binding indemnity in the form of Cthar technological data and specialized resources, payable over 50 cycles. This was genius. Humanity demanded not territory, but the tools to ensure its long-term security and accelerate its own development, preventing future technological gaps. The Cthar, desperate to recover Archon Var and stop the catastrophic data broadcasts, agreed to the terms, signing the Treaty of the Azure Fringe. This was the official birth of the Terran Mandate, marking humanity's arrival on the galactic stage not as a subservient client race, but as a formidable, respected, and terrifyingly clever sovereign power. This single moment redefined humanity's place in the stars. We used our victory not for conquest, but for self-determination and technological bootstrapping. With the threat neutralized and the technology transfer underway, the story moves into its final phase, the application of the newly acquired knowledge. Dr. Thorne's teams immediately began reverse engineering the Cthar FTL drive, finally making true interstellar travel a reality for humanity. The first human-designed FTL-capable starships, blending Cthar efficiency with human robustness, were appropriately named the Vanguard class. Rostova commissioned the immediate dispatch of unmanned probes to the nearest habitable systems within the new Terran Mandate, solidifying our claim through peaceful exploration and scientific observation. The deepest HFY reflection here is on the concept of true defense. The Cthar and other galactic powers defined defense through superior offense. Humanity defined defense through superior adaptability and intelligence. We didn't just survive, we successfully negotiated a future where we held the technological blueprints to our own defense, a profound testament to our foresight. Our capacity for peace was just as ruthless and effective as our capacity for war. The final scene of this era is a quiet one. Jax, now heading the nascent Terran Diplomatic Corps' communications branch, receives a cryptic, encoded message originating from a highly advanced, ancient galactic civilization known only as the Observers. The message is short, translated through the Cthar protocol structures. We have watched. Your species' capacity for calculated chaos is unprecedented. You have earned your place. But know this, the Cthar were merely the perimeter guard. The true darkness still waits. Jax and Rostova look at the message, understanding that the struggle for existence is eternal. But they don't panic. They don't despair. They look at the bustling shipyards, the energetic research teams, the unified world below them, and they smile. They had faced the impossible and won, not with brute strength, but with pure, unrelenting human ingenuity. The galaxy was vast and the threats were many, but the final, undeniable truth remained: humanity was ready. The age of being underestimated was over. The age of the Terran Mandate had begun. The Architect's Dilemma, integrating the impossible. The years following the Treaty of the Azure Fringe were not marked by peace and leisure, but by an explosive, almost chaotic period of growth known as the Assimilation Era. Humanity, armed with the entirety of Cthar engineering data, faced a new kind of crisis: technological overload. The sheer volume and complexity of the alien knowledge threatened to splinter the IDIC and strain global infrastructure. This internal struggle, the struggle to wisely manage a sudden, overwhelming boon, became the next great test of human ingenuity and unity. Dr. Eris Thorne, leading the new Terran Interstellar Research and Development Agency (TERDA, warned General Rostova that simply integrating the Cthar systems wholesale was a path to dependency. The Cthar systems were too rigid, too specialized, and too fragile outside their specific protocols. Thorne argued for parallel evolution, maintaining robust human systems while selectively adapting alien elements. This meant ignoring the Cthar's most elegant but most complex weapons, and instead focusing on areas where human flexibility could yield unexpected benefits, particularly in propulsion, shielding, and life support systems. One of the greatest engineering feats of this era was the development of the hybrid warp drive. Cthar FTL was based on massive, energy-intensive quantum entanglement fields. Human engineers, drawing on decades of fusion research, merged the Cthar spatial folding mechanism with a much smaller, more efficient human-designed microfusion reactor. The resulting drives were slower than the Cthar originals, but they were vastly safer, easier to maintain, and crucially did not require rare, non-Terran elements for continuous operation. This symbolized the core HFY principle: we don't need to be the most advanced, we just need to be the most sustainable and adaptable. However, this period was not without its shadows. The captured Archon VAR remained a persistent problem. Despite the humanitarian treatment, VAR was a conduit for Cthar influence, sending subtle, encoded messages through the very medical and communication systems humanity provided. Jax, now Director of Interstellar Intelligence, noticed an inexplicable pattern of low-grade industrial sabotage occurring across key TERDA facilities: minor component failures, delayed supply chains, and unexplained software glitches. It wasn't an attack, but a systematic, demoralizing campaign of frustration orchestrated by VAR's silent network. Jax realized VAR was weaponizing human impatience. The Cthar knew that humanity, with its short attention spans and volatile emotions, craved immediate results. VAR's sabotage was designed to slow the assimilation era to a crawl, hoping that internal human political friction would cause the whole unified effort to collapse. The Cthar had learned that humanity's strength, adaptability, was balanced by its weakness, impatience, and internal dissent. The solution came from an unlikely source: the Humanities Department. A young xenolinguist noticed that VAR's communications followed a pattern based on Cthar's cyclical historical narratives, subtle references to periods of collapse and resurgence in their own empire. Jax and Rostova realized they could defeat VAR's sabotage not with more security, but with superior narrative control. They initiated Project Vigilance, a public education campaign that openly admitted to the challenges and setbacks. News broadcasts featured engineers like Thorne explaining the difficulties of blending the technologies, showing failed FTL jumps and shattered shielding components. The message was honest and simple: this is hard, but we will overcome it. This transparency, this open admission of struggle, completely neutralized VAR's sabotage. When the people expected problems, the problems lost their power to demoralize. The Kthar, who ruled through absolute manufactured perfection, could never have conceived of a society that weaponized its own failures. The ultimate breakthrough came not from a massive lab, but from a small, overlooked team focused on life support. They were attempting to integrate Kthar molecular filtration systems with human recycling technology. They discovered that the Kthar, with their strict caste system, had built inherent environmental bias into their systems, meaning different castes were slightly penalized in efficiency and resource allocation. The human team, led by a humble sanitation expert, realized that by removing these biases, they could create a universal life support system that was exponentially more efficient than the Kthar original. The reason? Human systems were designed to support everyone equally, maximizing the potential of the collective. This became the symbol of the Terran Mandate. Humanity did not just acquire Kthar technology, we purified it of its societal flaws, making it better, more inclusive, and more powerful. We proved that human equality is a force multiplier. The Kthar built a brilliant but flawed machine. Humanity built a resilient, adaptable ecosystem. In the final scene of this era, General Rostova personally visited Archon Var. She did not gloat. She simply informed him that his efforts had failed, and that the Kthar technologies were now fueling the expansion of the Terran Mandate. She then revealed the ultimate lesson: your empire valued order and caste above all. We value the individual mind. When you suppress the potential of a single mind in your system, you accept failure. We allow every mind to contribute, every failure to teach, and every flaw to become a source of invention. That, Archon, is why we will always adapt faster than you can conquer. Var, defeated not by an army but by a philosophy he couldn't comprehend, finally broke. He saw the full, terrifying truth of the human spirit. The era concluded with the successful launch of the first Terran FTL Explorer fleet, not built for war but for true, peaceful interstellar outreach, carrying the message of human resilience to the wider galaxy. The Forge of Soul had given way to the limitless horizon.